Okay, let's get going. Welcome, everyone. This is a note. Well, this is a reminder that this is governs everything that we do at the IETF. So please make sure you are aware of this. Few tips here. If you're in the meeting, please use Meet Echo to log in, and because we don't have blue sheets anymore, so please use those so we would know who's in the meeting, and you'll be able to use it to join the queue. Keep audio and video off unless you're on site. Masks are mandatory. Please keep those. For remote participants, make sure your audio and video are off unless you want to say something. And please use a headset if possible. Just as a reminder, SECDISPATCH recommends next steps for new work. It doesn't adopt any documents, and there are typically 5 possible outcomes. Direct an existing document to an existing work group, propose a new working group, AD sponsor a document, additional discussion is needed, and the IETF shouldn't work on this topic. So the agenda for logistic, Ted Hardy is going to take us notes for us this time. Thank you, Ted. And that's the agenda here. We have a number of items. That DKG will start with encrypted email and with clear text copies. We'll allocate 15 minutes for that. Security consideration for Tenet ID and similar fields. Donald will take 15 minutes to talk about that. David, he might be late. I don't know if you're here. Awesome. Thank you. We'll talk about updates to 509 policy validation. That's 15 minutes. If we have time, then we will allocate 5 minutes for secure routing. And if we have any time left, we'll talk about RISVA, whatever that is. And then we'll summarize that 5 minutes after that. Any questions, comments about the agenda? DKG.
Hello, everyone. Assuming this works. There's been some discussion over the last couple days on the SECDISPATCH list about the clear text email copies draft that I wrote. This slide deck is a lot of suspense here. Next slide, please. So the picture that's on this next slide, there you go, is the scenario that the draft tries to address. So the person on the right hand there with the blue has cryptographic key material for themselves and also to be able to sign a message. And also they'd have cryptographic key material for the person in the lower right who's wearing green, but they don't send an encrypted copy to the person in red. So they're sending one message and sending it to 2 recipients, and they encrypt one copy and not the other. You might say, why would you do that? I would also say, why would you do that? But the fact is, people do it. And it causes a lot of weird downstream paper cuts in the end-to-end encrypted email user experience. So next slide, please. The problem statement here, the kinds of paper cuts that we see is when you receive a message, your mail user agent wants to render it and tell you what is the cryptographic status of this message? Was it encrypted? And you don't really know because you don't know whether a clear text copy was also sent. And when you hit reply all, a good mail user agent won't leak the content of your encrypted message to in the reply. And so if you hit reply all and you don't have a key for the other recipient, because maybe they don't have a key, because maybe they are a mailing list, perhaps they're a mailing list like the IETF mailing list, which is archived on the public internet, so there is no encryption key for it. So when you hit reply all, you can't encrypt your reply. And a reasonable mail user agent that cares about end-to-end encryption will refuse to will refuse to send the message because it can't send it encrypted, and you've got quoted and attributed clear text content in it. So that's the sort of thing where the recipient hits reply all in the usual workflow, and then all of a sudden their mail user agent says, no, I won't let you. And they say, why? This encryption thing, this is the pits. I'm going to turn it all off. And one of the many reasons why we just don't have encrypted email. Next slide. So the question is, can we signal as a sender that we are sending clear text copies, or that we have not sent clear text copies, so that the recipient can handle it in a more reasonable way? If we could signal it, maybe we could do something smarter if the mail user agents all understood what to do. So the baseline question is, if we were going to signal such a thing, where would we signal? I think the answer for that is an email header that ends up on the inside of the cryptographic envelope of the message. But I could be convinced otherwise. I believe there's an open question about, do we signal in detail, like I sent an encrypted copy to these recipients and not to those recipients? Or do we just say, I sent an encrypted copy to all recipients versus somebody got a clear text copy? And the third question is, what guidance should we give the recipients on how they should behave when they get a message that either a clear text copy was made or is indeterminate? How do we advise recipients to behave sensibly? Like, do you show the user that this message was encrypted, but it has a little question mark over the lock? Or I don't think we want to get in this draft into the specifics of like a concrete user interface design, but we should be thinking about how should we represent the cryptographic status. So that is the problem statement of this piece. There's already been some discussion that I think has been clarifying on the list. So thank you to the folks who participated in that discussion. I'm asking the basic dispatch questions. Where should this land if it lands at the IETF? Or should somehow this just say, don't ever do this and we'll come and beat you up if your mail user agent does it? But even if we say that, how do we say that from within the IETF and get people to take it seriously? Any suggestions for where to dispatch such a thing?
Jim?
Or questions about what this is talking about if I'm not clear?
Hi, Jim Fenton. I guess I've got a question about whether this is a protocol or whether this is more of just an MUA feature that you'd like to have. I've only just kind of scanned the draft, but I'm not quite sure what the interoperability aspects of this are. And there was not exactly the same, but kind of a little bit of an analogous feature that I proposed a few years ago that was done through the UTA working group. Mm-hmm. This is not a TLS sort of thing, but I mean, there are some similarities there. In that case, we're mostly dealing with security on the wire. In this case, it's more security at rest that you're concerned with.
Right. So those are good questions. So I do think this is an interoperability issue because I sort of beat my head against this for a few months before I thought of just writing up this draft. But what happens is one person's tooling makes decision X and it causes a failure in another person's tooling, right? That's the scenario that we're seeing. Somebody sends a clear text copy and then somebody else can no longer reply all in a safe way, right? And those two decisions don't work if the two sides don't know that they're doing it. So there needs to be some sort of communication between the two mail user agents to distinguish it. So that's the interoperable bit. I agree with you that it's not the same as your require TLS thing because it's end-to-end cryptography and not messaging to the transport. So because we're trying to message to the other side, I think it needs to happen on the inside of whatever cryptographic envelope is being passed there. So I do think that that there's some protocol bit that's needed, and I think that defining the protocol without defining what we think reasonable guidance is for the mail user agent on how to deal with it would be a mistake, because then we could very easily pick the wrong description of what the signal needs to contain.
I'm DKG, and I don't think that you should dispatch this. I'm actually surprised, right? So this is actually Wes Herdiker from ISI. I feel like if you were back here, right, that would be your answer to your own drafts. I'm a little puzzled.
What would be my answer?
That you shouldn't dispatch it. That this is not, something that we should do. But because I think the problem is a lot more complex than even just this, right? There's also encrypted transports for SMTP, of which, with Dane and other things of which I'm an author of. There's a lot more pieces in this. So if we are going to dispatch it, I would say it's a big enough problem that it probably needs to be a working group.
Oof. So this doesn't intend to cover anything but end-to-end encrypted email messages. So transport encryption's out.
Thinking from a big picture architecture, how do we do this for the end user, which is really what you're trying to do, right? Yes, it will begin with maybe a end user to end user. I mean, you're talking about something that shouldn't be done in the first place, and maybe that's the right thing to do, is write a draft saying, don't do this.
Right, but how do I get, that was my initial inclination, right? Just like, can we hit the folks who are doing it and say, don't do it? But I've talked to some folks who do it, whose mail users do it, and they say, well, I'm doing this because more encrypted copies is better than fewer encrypted copies, or something, arguments like that. I don't necessarily buy those, but I don't think I can just convince people by saying, don't do it. What I want to do is I want to say, we have a signal that you're not allowed to put in your message according to the standard of what this message says, unless you have not sent encrypted mail or something like that. And then we can then get other mail user agents to mark those messages as not as secure as they could be. And that kind of thing will drive the ecosystem towards reasonable behavior, I think. That's the hope. But I think we need a mechanism that mail user agents can agree on to do it.
This is Pete Resnick. There's a bunch of questions I have here, which are whether most of this is a user agent function rather than protocol. I think you've at least acknowledged that there are a bunch of those issues, but there might still be protocol for interoperability purposes on top.
Yep.
And I'm not sure you've combed them all out. I don't know that this eventually needs a working group, but it might do well with a non-working group forming BOF, even if it's online only, because I think you want a bunch of email people in the room along with some security people to sort of comb out which are just UA issues that someone's going to have to figure out what the buttons look like, and which are the pieces of information you actually need to transfer between them.
I mean, my ideal for this is that the protocol mechanism lets you say there's no buttons. That the mail user agent behavior is not something that we're asking the user to do, right? But the mail user agent today can't do it because it doesn't know.
So the thing that got me started trying to sort this was, I thought, I know that there's going to be a mail user agent who says, okay, I've got an encrypted message that this person's going to reply to and insists on replying in the clear because they're an idiot. Okay. Even if it was never sent in the clear beforehand, they're going to do exactly the wrong thing.
Sure.
And I know that there are going to be user agents who have to implement that just from a usability point of view. Their users going to insist that they be able to do that. Given that fact, that means that that's being done with just user-to-user agent signaling. I'm telling you, damn it, I'm going to do this, and yes, I am allowed to do this whether you want me to or not. So I'm thinking that there are more instances of those kinds of what is really just a user interaction with this stupid program issue, and what is something that we actually want to communicate that's worth communicating. So I think it might just be, an online BOF where just sort the issue, or it could just be by email. But I think it's worth getting email people involved in the discussion overtly before you decide that this can be done with like an AD-sponsored doc, because I'm not convinced all of the issues are sorted yet.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Eric?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we should dispatch this somewhere. I think this is worth doing. I think what's complicated is that like, kind of like do not track. This is like an incredibly simple mechanism with a lot of implications. And if we just agreed, I mean, like if you were just willing to be like, hey, here is like this header and we can define what it means. And then there'll be no text whatsoever about how you want to process it. Like just like do what you want. Then like actually we could like 80 spots for this and be quite simple, right? I think that the problem is like you would like, and I'm not saying I disagree with, like some guidance about what to do with this information once you have it.
Right, because I think that we won't be able to figure out what the signal should be unless we actually talk about what we want to do with the signal.
I'm not fighting you on that. So I think that means it does need to be in a working group. I would have hoped we could find a working group that like was suitable for this purpose. I'm not sure there was one. I heard LAMPS bandied about. That does not seem to be quite the right answer to me.
I mean, I'm currently, LAMPS has a draft E2E mail guidance document that I'm the editor on. I wish there were more people, contributing text to it.
Yeah,
so it smells LAMPSy to me, but Russ
maybe,
is here. I don't know if Russ feels
maybe
about
we
that
effectively
point.
recharted LAMPS to be like generic mail maintenance. But like that's not like what the title like is. That's not like what it says in the tin. So maybe if that's what our plan is for the catch-all thing for like maintaining encrypted email, not just adding like, isn't the first like letter of LAMPS limited? Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like like I don't go there because I'm like I just don't like whatever adds in algorithms. But like if it's like the generic email maintenance thing, then we should recharted that. But but I think it should be I would hope we could find a home for it that not require a new working group. And if LAMPS is it, then LAMPS is it.
Braun mentioned maybe email core also.
So I just want to pull my AD prerogative. So we put all the things on the table, midstream here per LAMPS. It appears to be in charter for me because number 4 in the item is provide concrete guidance for implementers of email user agents to promote interoperability of end-to-end cryptographic protection of email messages. And you can stretch that in a lot of different ways.
Thanks,
Jonathan.
Does titles just bad because there's limited additional mechanisms? How about like whatever, like I don't know. If we put it emu.
It's limited, but the un is silent.
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan. We have a few more minutes and we have still 4 people in the queue. Please go ahead, Jonathan.
Sure. Jonathan Hoydens. Clarifying question. I don't understand what the intended behavior would be. Is it reply, you create a button that's reply only to encrypted? Is it this email is authentic but not confidential? Or is it send it to encrypted with history and send it to unencrypted without history? Or like, what's the expected behavior?
So the goal of this draft is not to encourage people to do this more. It's to say, if you're going to do this, you should mark your messages in the following way. And if you aren't going to do this, you can mark your messages in this other way. And then recipients can deal with that the way that they see fit. Right. Because the recipients are the ones that pay the cost, right? Because they can't reply all smoothly. They see the message, it looks like it was encrypted, but actually it was published on the internet in a mailing list archive or whatever, right? So the goal is when I'm sending, by putting this signal in my message, I'm going to commit to my choice. And then the people who receive the message can then respond to it in ways that make sense for them without breaking as much.
So the signal is, I am behaving badly.
I mean, I think it's bad behavior, but some reasonable people apparently don't all agree on that.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Rich.
Rich Sauls. Here we go. Yeah, I think we should. This is an IETF gap. We've defined the semantics of mail headers. We've defined the semantics of secured communication within, as message bodies, but we haven't said what happens when you mix secure and insecure, which is, I think, really what you're pointing out, and we should address that. It seems to me mainly an email header specification, and it's probably the place to put it and have the security people come over and comment and say, no, you need a little more or a little less. Well, I guess we never say that, but yeah.
I'll say less, but wait, Rich, that doesn't answer the dispatch question.
The dispatch questions, I believe this belongs in applications, wherever email is these days. And let them figure out whether it's a new working group or email core or email extensions. That's what I think. But it's definitely an IETF issue.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich. Daniel? Who's Daniel? Where's Daniel?
Hello, this is Daniel Huffens from Proton. So we are one of the ones, since our goal is to end-to-end encrypt all email, and I think yours is to PKG. And
yes,
the reason we do this is because not all recipients might trust their email server equally, right? So some might have a public key that we can encrypt to, and others might just trust their email server. Obviously, an IETF mailing list is not an example of that, but I think that telling mail user agents that they shouldn't do this is a bad idea, because then they'll encrypt email less, and it seems to me like the wrong direction if goal is to encrypt all email. But anyway, I would be in favor of making a draft that defines a header that specifies how to signal about this and how should deal with it.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Yoav?
Hi, Avnir. I'm with the BOF proposal because, I mean, yeah, we can take this idea and have some art working group standardizes, and if we can tell them, okay, we have a security problem and this will solve the security problem and all will be good. But we can't say that. I mean, we still have to discuss this and come up with some ideas and see if this is the best that we can do to improve the situation. And until we got to that decision, I don't think we should ask Art to standardize Daniel's idea.
Thanks, Yoav. We're running out of time. I don't see any agreement here, so I think we need more discussion on this to be able to dispatch it, okay?
Okay, so where should I keep discussing it? Dispatch my dispatch discussion. Sorry?
Do one of the chairs want to come to the mic if they have an opinion? Because it seems like lamps might wind up being the home, but attention is necessary. So perhaps, is it possible to do a buff and then send it to lamps anyway to draw up attention?
I can't tell who's speaking. I just heard a disembodied voice, but I like the suggestion.
One of the chairs, Kathleen Moriarty. I apologize. It's very early.
Hi, thanks.
So I'd like to embellish that a little bit. Roman Danilo, one of the SECDs, kind of with Paul, and we've been coordinating with our art counterparts. Yeah, we recognize that this is kind of at the nexus of two different kind of groups. This is a little bit of the conversation of, do we pull security in or put it in security and get the outside expertise? So we are going to chat a little bit with art offline to figure out how to bridge these kind of gaps, and whether there's something we can land in art or whether we need some other class of conversation. We're not ready to do that right now.
Okay. Thanks.
So official action is AD's caught the action.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Hopefully got your last here. See, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi there. I'm Donald Eastlake with FutureWay, and talk about this draft. The 00 draft name is there. It's a little rough as a 00 draft. We'll be posting a 01 draft very late today, so you might want to wait till tomorrow to actually read the draft, but it won't be that different. Next slide. So the idea is you have some network domain, administrator, a single administrator, and you have packets coming in and going out, and some information is added to the packet that is visible inside the domain to some extent, and you want to see what the security considerations for that would be. This is to be information that wouldn't otherwise be visible. It might be that's information that's only available at the ingress, like the ingress port ID or VLAN tag or who knows what, or it might be stuff that would be invisible for other reasons. Actually, next slide gives us a little bit further. Yeah, this sort of shows what's happening here. And I think the next slide is yeah. So this is, I was talking about, information might be based on stuff that's only available at the ingress port, or only available to the ingress node, or it might be stuff that would be forwarded anyway, but you're going to be doing encryption. You want to have some stuff that's not encrypted or that you pull out and put earlier in the packet, or maybe that you want this information to be acted on by something that has a limit to how deep it can look into the packet, and the information will be too deep, so you put it earlier in the packet. So even though this information was there already, you make it more visible and more accessible. Next slide. So what is the possible problem with this? Primarily threats due to privacy, or possibly due to modification of this additional information. So the privacy would be if you're getting surveilled somehow on the link, and this information could make it much easier to tell more about the source of the packet. Instead of just maybe an IP address, you might have additional information which would reveal the actual host, or even the process on the host or something, or person, or whatever. And as well as more fine-grained identity of the source, you might also have aggregate source information that might reveal that a bunch of flows are really coming from the same organization, even though they appear to be separate flows. And it might also be surveilled inside a node, but then of course you have more severe problems. And they could also be modified in both of those places. There are obviously other threats. I mean, there's packet deletion and replay and things like that, but those are always present, and you should always be thinking about those for your security considerations that are not particularly related to adding information, which is the focus of this draft. Next slide. So what are the things you can do? You can do various things to protect against surveillance. And there are other considerations you kind of need to think about in this situation. Next slide. So the really important thing is not to put the information there unless you really need to. Minimization. You really must consider minimizing the information. If it's not there, it's not going to cause these possible privacy problems or other things like that. So that's the most dominant thing to consider. Next slide. If you do include it, then of course you would be good if you can encrypt it. I think the more you can encrypt along the way is a practical matter for your particular application, the better things are. You can obviously encrypt in different ways. You can do hop by hop or edge to edge. Hop by hop just protects against link surveillance, but edge to edge protects against that and also observation inside the transit nodes. But on the other hand, it makes some stuff invisible, and you need to have at least the information for routing and for determining quality of service available to the transit nodes so they can do the right things. If you can't encrypt something, you can always use authenticated encryption with additional data to secure that. There will be some information available to somebody who can surveil your traffic, like the number and size of packets. And to conceal that is possible, but it's not going to be very efficient because you need to pad things and add packets and stuff like that. Next slide. So if you can't minimize it by removing the data, you can't encrypt or whatever, you also should, according to this draft, consider obfuscation. So it's not obscurity exactly, it's doing things that make it just a little bit harder for somebody to hack you and and protect you against inadvertent disclosure. For example, you might have somebody who's trying to debug your network, so they're observing traffic, and they're just doing it with some program, whatever, that interprets the packet in ASCII and hex and whatever. So if there happens to be personally identifiable information in this packet, or some critical numbers or something in some part of the packet, they may just see it there on their screen. And just very simple things like XORing with a fixed string or something like that will make it make you avoid inadvertent disclosure. And you'd only use this if there was if it needs to be accessible easily by the nodes along the way or something, which know how to reverse this trivial modification. And if you are assigning new identifiers like various tag values or addresses or things like that, it's best if you can assign them in a non-sequential manner, not just counting up, so as to make somebody who just happens to be observing the traffic and thinking about forging something able to easily forge what would be the next sequential packet or something like that. Next slide. This is sort of the last resort, and just something that it'll be better than nothing, but not all that much necessarily. So you always have to consider integrity and authentication. The additional information probably has to be secure if you need to have it in there. And using authenticated encryption, of course, is what you want to do. The fact that you're encrypting stuff and or having these additional fields may open additional covert channels. And I think, as is fairly well known, it's not generally possible to eliminate all covert channels, but you can cut down on the bandwidth, and that's something you should think about to avoid having easy places where covert channels can be created. Next slide. So there's lots of examples. There's a couple more, I think, in the draft. Things like service function chaining has this network service header. It has a context header space. And if you look at RFC 9263, it defines a lot of stuff you can put in there, which with under minimization, you should only put in there if you actually need it. If you look at things like VXLAN and NVGRE, they in fact have a tenant ID, a few other bits and fields. Geneva also has a very flexible variable length options field. You can put stuff in there. There's IPv6 options. That's not on the slide, actually. And especially if you're doing tunneling, where you have the inner packet, then outside of that is a tunnel header probably, and then you have an outer IP. The outer IP is typically not very constrained. So especially if you're using IPv6 there, which is not common, but if you are, then there's lots of bits in the address you could probably use to salt some additional information away if you wanted to do that. Anyway, so it says expect to post a revised version. I expect that I've actually finished it. It's being looked at by my co-author, and expect to post it this evening probably. Comments would be great, and it should go somewhere. I think this would be a useful draft to have, and there's been there's one or two comments on the list that this would be a useful document to have.
Thanks, Donald. Any comments, thoughts? Paul.
Paul out of Security AD. So I do think you have a good list of security items to talk about to the various encapsulation and routing protocols. So I would almost say the security work has almost been done. Now you have to apply it to all the routing protocols. So to me, this seems more like a routing area item than a security area item. So I'm looking at my routing colleagues, routing ADs. I see one right there.
What are we, like, all pointing at each other now? John Scudder. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem inappropriate for a routing area working group. I don't think that's the only place where it could go, and I don't think that the routing area working group is the best place to. I mean, this is like you're analyzing the security properties of, or yeah, I don't know that's necessarily the best place to go for expertise in thinking about attacks, but it probably is the best place to go to seek expertise about routing. So yeah, I mean, you could almost do a coin flip and say, you've got half the expertise you need in either place. I'm not opposed to that as a dispatch destination.
Yeah, it seems to me it could go, let's Donald back again, it could go many places. Not all these fields are really strictly related to routing. Some of them may be related to transport or class of service. Some of them may be related to whatever. And there are, of course, already security considerations in all the documents that define all these fields, but I don't think they're sufficiently comprehensive to include all the things that are in this draft. At least that's not my expectation.
Oh, sorry, I didn't put myself in the queue. Still John Scudder. I'm sorry, I have not read the draft. Is one potential use of this, almost a as an input for how to write a security considerations for your routing area document?
I think it's more likely that if you were writing a document or updating it or whatever, that had such a field, that it was either proposing adding or defining in a header or something like that, you would say, you would reference this from your security considerations. And before reading it, it would remind you of some specific things you should put in there. But it would provide at least a comprehensive coverage of the things that should be thought about when people are using this new header you're defining in some other draft.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Warren?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it seems possibly more like int or transport or something, because I think a large chunk of this is when you end up encapsulating packets. I mean, potentially otherwise somewhere in ops, but I don't really know how much progress it would get there. I don't really think it's routing, because a fair chunk of this is taking bits of the packet out, sticking them somewhere else, or encapsulating them with a different header. And that doesn't seem particularly routing-y to me.
Okay, Scott?
Yes, I believe the proper target that this should be is not how to help people write security considerations. It should be how to write, how to design your protocols to actually avoid various possible issues that they may not have considered.
I think that's a good point.
Any other thoughts?
So I guess the conclusion is it should go to routing or enter transport or security.
Nice summary. Yeah, the conclusion is that there's no conclusion here. Yeah, I think maybe ADs, do you have any thoughts here, or should, I think looks like more discussion is needed. But
I don't know that needs to be decided right away. I hope to get comments on the draft and improve it.
Okay.
For a couple of versions, and
awesome.
Maybe we can dispatch later or something.
Perfect. Thanks, Donald. Okay. David?
Hello. Okay, this works. I apologize if I'm even less coherent than usual. I only just landed, so I'm slightly frazzled. Yeah, so I have a document.
I hope I uploaded the last one. Maybe. Okay.
That's the correct one, yeah.
Okay. That's good.
So I have a document updating some portion of X509. Next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, why stick to easy things? Next slide. So in X509, there's this feature called policy validation, and it's made up of actually like a bunch of extensions, but the main two are, there's the certificate policies extension, which give you a list of policies, which are OIDs, that are asserted by the certificate. So this would be if like a CA issues some blue certificates and some red certificates, and the red certificates are like more validated or something. And then when they show up in intermediates, then they act as constraints. So as an RP, you like intersect them up the chain, and that's all reasonable. Then there's policy mappings. So what policy mappings does is, suppose I'm a CA and I issue red certificates, and I would like to delegate to this other organization, but the thing that I call red, they call crimson. And rather than us agreeing on the names of the colors, I just rename the OID. So I can issue a cross certificate to this other organization and say, if they say crimson, please treat it as if I said red. And then you just get to list arbitrarily many of these like tuples, and then the RP needs to somehow make sense of it. Then there's a whole bunch of other features that all intersect with this that I will spare you the trouble of going through, but if you read all the bits of policy validation, it's loads of fun. Next slide.
And David, you can look at here.
Oh,
yeah.
That's much more convenient. Okay, so how does the RP make sense of this? So if you follow RFC 5280, it says you build a policy tree. A policy tree is a tree where there's one level for each certificate in the chain, and then each node corresponds to a policy that is asserted by that certificate, and then the edges are mappings between them. So in this example, if we have an intermediate with policies 1, 2, and 5, and then those mappings, and your end entity has 2, 3, 6, then 3 matches to 1 by way of mapping, 2 is unmapped, so it shows up on its own, 5 and 6 don't match anything, so your final policies are 1 and 2 in authority space, or 3 and 2 in subject space, but nobody uses those. Next slide. All right, I don't need to look over there. So in order to build this, you just follow this very simple algorithm. It's fine. Next slide. Oh, okay, it didn't all fit, sorry. So yeah, the point is that like, because that thing is so complicated, everyone just transcribes that algorithm directly into their spec. And there's this one bit here. For each policy in the certificate, and for each node in the previous level that matches this policy, create a child node. So I said that each node corresponds to a policy, but they're not one-to-one. One policy can cause multiple nodes to happen. And then because there's multiple nodes in this depth, then that means that then for the next depth, there'll be more matches. And so at every level, you get more and more nodes. Next slide. Come on.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
Which means that X509 certificate validation is an exponential space operation. It's great. So if you have a certificate with policies 1 and 2 and mappings of all pairs 1, 2 to 1, 2, so this is just 6 entries, then you repeat this down your chain. At every level, your policy tree doubles in size, and I have had loads of fun knocking out the cert verification daemon on my laptop until I got the vendor to fix it. Next slide. So this is a denial of service vulnerability. In most cases, you have to be a CA to exploit it, which is partially a mitigation, but if you're a hosting provider, you may evaluate an untrusted PKI on behalf of your customer. Even if you do trust your PKI, X509 is all about delegation, so a trusted CA may just issue a constraint intermediate to someone who is otherwise untrusted, and unless they remember to set the inhibit policy mapping constraint, which they probably didn't, then that sub-CA can go do this. Next slide. So how do you fix this? Actually, the fix is really simple. RFC 5280 just specified the wrong algorithm. Every time RFC 5280 says to make 2 nodes, we should have just made 1 node with 2 parents, which means it's not a tree, this is a DAG. This reason this works out is that if you like run through that mess of text, every copy of a node is recursively identical down the bottom, so you shouldn't have made 2 copies in the first place. Next slide. And if you do that, then policy graphs now grow linearly and everything is great. Next slide. So that's all this document does. It updates 5280 to the new algorithm. There is much more text than that small example I suggested because I had to update all of the text to like refer to this new structure and also update all the examples to be more illustrative. But the length comes from the original document. I didn't just like make this more longer for the sake of it. It does have to update the output of the process because 5280 says the output is the tree, which means that this exponential space structure is actually in your public API, and that's no good. So it instead uses the formulation that's in the ITU X509 document where you just get the list of policies and their qualifiers, and that one is like a much more manageable thing. And then if you can't get away with this because you followed 5280's original output public API, the document also discusses other mitigations. You can limit the certificate depth. You could just stop once you see too many nodes. That's what OpenSSL has done in their most recent security advisory. You could just turn off this feature altogether if you don't need it. That would be great. And if you verify signatures first, then at least only trusted CAs can attack you. And there was, okay, yeah. Any questions? Where should this go?
Okay, thanks, David. Stephen.
Hi, Stephen Farrell. So I have a question and then I guess a possible answer. The question is, why go to the trouble of doing anything other than getting rid of all this crap?
I would not disagree.
Okay.
So in the WebPKI, EV certificates use this. I don't think they use mappings, so you could probably just turn off policy mappings. I believe the FedPKI loves to use this feature, but I don't know offhand. But I guess the other answer is if you previously implemented it, it is a backwards compatibility break to drop this feature, and so you may the document does one of the mitigations do amount to the other alternate mitigations amount to please don't implement this. But if you have to, here is the way to do it sensibly.
So if the outcome was telling people not to do it and not telling them how to do it, then I'd be happy that this was dispatched anywhere and got done. If the outcome was more towards here's another way of doing something that nobody wants to do, I'd probably prefer that it was we just ignore the problem.
Sorry, what was the first one? Say that again.
So if the plan is to tell people just never do this and rip out that code, then I'm happy that this gets dispatched anywhere and gets done. If the plan is to say, here's yet another way to do something that nobody wants to do, I'd rather we just ignore the problem.
Okay. All right. Sean.
Hey, so I guess I'm going to say the opposite. I'm wildly supportive if you're doing this. I think it should just go to LAMPS because that's where it is. If you want to swap out the algorithm and say, you can keep doing it this other crazy way if you want, but here's maybe another way to do it more efficiently, make your choice. I think that's perfectly okay. I will note that at one point long ago, I tried to get new examples for how to make key identifiers included in the 5280 and got kicked in the teeth. So whatever happens, but if you're going to make life better for the people who do use policy mappings, please let's document it. And I think you might have experience with that. So thanks for doing all the work.
Yeah, we've implemented this in Boring SL and Chromium, and the algorithm works fine, although we don't bother with policy qualifiers.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Hoyland. Surely a correct dispatch option would be just provide some good libraries and people will use them.
Okay. DKG.
Read the dispatch question. LAMP seems like the right place to go. I am curious about what the implications are when the APIs change, but that's not for the IETF to deal with, I guess. But yeah, LAMPs, and this is a mess. And sorry, one more question. Do you know anyone who actually uses policy mappings?
I think the FedPKI does, but I can't say authoritatively. I've just been told from colleagues who used to do this stuff.
So you've never seen them? And Russ moaned yes, just for the record.
Deb. Deb, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go.
Now we can.
Yes, indeed. Fed uses it. Fed PKI uses it. DoD PKI uses it. They love it. It's terrible.
John.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say I've implemented it as well and used it for 15 years, and yes, I've run into exponential things with this. So this is a great enhancement to this, and yeah, so I would support putting this into the LAMPS working group because that makes sense. That's where all the X509 stuff is.
Okay. Mike
Ellsworth. This is actually a question for Deb, I think. Are you going to endorse this draft? Is there a PKI that wants to do this rather than a verifier?
As I said on the chat, nobody listens to me, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, Roman, you're standing there.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of wrap up. I'm really struck with this. Seems like a very nuanced kind of topic that needs all of the expertise we have in the IETF for that. And I was wondering, we eventually got there to LAMPS, and the question I was going to ask is, does someone think we have a place in the IETF other than LAMPS that has the cluster of expertise to evaluate? I'm not saying necessarily publish this, but adopt it, or I'm sorry, at least kind of bring the document in and have a conversation about what the next step would be. And those can be a range of different steps. So I think kind of LAMPS, and I didn't hear anything other than that. So I think we have a result.
Anybody has a problem with going with LAMPS? Go for it.
Do I just like email it there and be
Yep.
like, can you adopt this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I will do that then.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Okay. Mailing. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I see two of them. Not sure which one. Let me see. Let me see which one.
Security function captures exposure.
Oh, exposure. Hold on. I don't see that here. Hold on. Don't see exposure here. The only ones I see both those here. Not sure which one. This is 515, 6, 7. This is the last one I got here. Okay, hold on. Maybe let me do this. Hold on. Just 1 second. Manage.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Hold on. Come on. I don't see it here. Honestly, do you want to go with what I have so far? You go with what I have so far? Okay. This one? Let's try this.
Okay, just
Okay.
use the old one.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. I have changed new slides of that. I'm Mei Chen from China Mobile. I bought a new idea here. I used to call it security. I don't care about security. Now I have a more accurate description: security functions, capabilities, exposure. Okay. Don't see the slide. I have changed it. Now we have existed programs for security service. As you know, China Mobile has many regions, almost in hundreds. Each region is responsible for purchasing and deploying the security equipment independently. So we have made the question that lock the visibility across multiple regions, and it is difficult to coordinate globally. To satisfy security equipment for end-to-end service, it is necessary to know the capabilities of all security devices in all the regions, but offline coordination is difficult as each region deployment status is dynamic. So it is important to have interoperable solutions. Because we purchase equipment from many vendors, we can easily enforce vendors to provide the exposure function during our evaluation process. As I only have 5 minutes, I want to get community feedback. If you are interested, please come to G304 today at 6:30 p.m. for detailed discussion. Thanks.
Okay, so you don't want to present any of those slides that you have here?
I don't need this
Okay.
slide because
Okay.
I have a new
Okay.
new slide. Yes.
Okay. Anybody has any thoughts? Not sure.
Sorry, this is Romanilu as AD, just as a process thing. I'm confused.
Yeah.
This is not the topic that we were going to talk about, or not related to the documents. And there's just a meeting mentioned. I don't understand what we're dispatching here.
Sorry for confusing you. Because I just used secure routing as the topic, but when I get some comments from the expert, they have the suggestion for that it is more accurate for security functions capabilities exposure, but I update the slides just before the moment, so it's only the old slides.
So is there something to dispatch?
No. Nothing, not at least at this stage.
So
yeah.
So if you have interest, please come to the G304.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, Andrew Alston, routing AD. So my comments are based on the use case draft around secure routing, because I did take a look at it. And reading that, I think that if you are going to bring this to be dispatched, it would actually be far better placed in RTGWG, because the routing feel around it definitely felt like that was a more routing centric document. And so from the routing area side, I would say that based on that use case document, it probably belongs in RTGWG.
So it's the problem of the topic that I use secure routing. So most of us are confused that it's the same thing about a routing, right? So sorry for that. We will modify it.
Okay. Thank you, Ming.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it for today, because we don't have enough time to present the last topic here. Kathleen, do you want to wrap it up here and with a summary?
Yes, thank you. This is Kathleen. So the first draft reviewed was Daniel Kahn-Gilmore's. That will go to AD follow-up to decide what happens next. The security considerations for tenant ID and similar fields is going back to the list. Discussion needed, no dispatch yet. And updates to X509 policy validation. That outcome is going to LAMPS, and secure routing, there's no action. So that's it. Thank you all.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thank you all. That's it for the day.